everybody, and welcome along to a brand new video today, the start of a brand new series of videos as well, as I'm kind of jumping back about a year ago really to talk about Doctor Who Series 11 once again. Of course, it's been nearly a year now, well over a year since the series at least started airing, and so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of have a little look back at it and see really now, a year on, whether my thoughts have changed, how I feel about it, having not watched any of the episodes since last year, since around the time that they aired. It just seemed, a good opportunity to tackle that. So I thought I'd do a series of videos, sort of 5 or 6 different videos where I'm just covering sort of 2 or 3 episodes at a time, just giving you my thoughts on them now, a year on from when they originally aired. So we do of course start off with The Woman Who Fell to Earth, the opening episode from Series 11 of Doctor Who. And a few weeks ago I watched this episode and recorded a few thoughts back then, so here it is, throwing it in right now, here's my thoughts. It just felt straight away like A, it felt like Doctor Who, and B, it just felt like actually a really good episode. It did a really great job of introducing all the new characters and setting up a new era and a new vibe for the programme. It had a really good, an interesting plot and storyline behind it, a great villain as well. It felt like all the aspects were actually there to create a really good story, and so I was kind of surprised that obviously a lot of people don't really like this anymore. Or maybe I'm being a little bit inaccurate and it's more the later parts of Series 11 that are less people's cup of tea, because I sort of roughly remember that this episode was fairly well received at the time. Certainly the viewing figures showed that, in getting the pretty much highest ever Doctor Who viewing figures for this episode this time last year, which was pretty crazy. But watching it back now, I can see it was definitely an episode that was worth watching, that's for sure. Right from the off, one of the things that I really noticed was how visually impressive this story is. Obviously it sets up a whole new era in terms of the visuals of the show, where it just looks so stunningly cinematic. Immediately those shots over the Sheffield countryside, over the hills, just the way the colouring's been done and the cinematic look of it just looks absolutely fantastic. I don't think Doctor Who's ever looked this good ever before really, so I thought that was straight away one of those sort of things that really grabbed me and made me really interested and wanted to keep watching this. Then obviously the gradual introduction of the different characters, Graham, Ryan, Grace, and then Yaz, and then obviously the Doctor's sort of glorious moment when she appears from the sky to come and sort of kind of save the day, but not quite at that point in the story. But it's just, I feel like it does do a really good job of just introducing these characters, giving each of them a backstory, giving each of them a reason why they're sort of connected to each other, and so it makes sense for them to be together rather than just 4 random people who have ended up thrown together for some reason. Like they've all got some sort of family or some sort of relationship link to keep them all together, which I think is really good and sort of makes a stronger reason for their connection straight off. Then in bringing in the Doctor, of course, for this episode, sort of 5 or 6 minutes into the story, she immediately kind of, I think, gets the screen presence really well. Just has sort of lots of great lines as she's establishing herself with the classic sort of Doctor who's not quite sure what's going on, was really interesting. And we just see this sort of continuing throughout the story. The character Tim Shaw in this story as well also really strikes me as actually quite a good villain. I know ultimately he becomes a bit useless by the end of episode 10 in Series 11, but in this episode he very much feels like a threat, like a menace, like he is actually going to go and just destroy this person in the Earth and then go and rule the Stenza race, some just deadly warrior race. And you can kind of tell that, and he really just has a really strong screen presence, I think, which is really fantastic. And so I felt like there was genuine threat, particularly in those scenes later on when we're on the crane and you've got Yaz and Ryan climbing up onto the crane, the Doctor on the top there, and just everything that's happening on there. I felt like there was a genuine threat, a genuine tension, which I'd kind of forgotten. I didn't really realise that it really created that so well, so I thought that was a really pleasant surprise. As much as this was a story that I do remember enjoying at the time, I feel like with the sort of year of distance from this episode, I almost enjoyed it more, I think, than I did at the time. Watching it back now with the context of what's to come in the rest of Series 11 that we saw, it strikes me as a really strong introduction. It really does do, as I say, a great job introducing the characters, and the sort of emotional impact at the end of the episode with Grace being killed off, that really hits home. I noticed it really felt very sort of shocking and surprising and quite heartfelt in that moment, I thought. So that was a really, I think, a great sort of twist to end an episode with, to kill off what seemed like she was going to be one of the main characters of the whole series. Of course, she ultimately does play quite a big role, even if it's in memory form, and then the whole confusion thing that it takes you away is, and all of that. But obviously she's essentially only part of this story as a sort of proper alive person, as it were. And then the end of this story, the brilliant cliffhanger where we see all the 4 main characters stuck out in the middle of space, outside a spaceship or anything, and then suddenly a to be continued moment. It's a great cliffhanger. It's a brilliant way of keeping an audience and making them want to tune in next week to find out what's going to happen. It just strikes me as it all did really well. All the aspects were there to create a great Doctor Who story, which is fantastic. So when I look at this episode in isolation, I struggle to see why there's such a sort of backlash and a critical fan sort of opinion of how bad Series 11 is as a whole and everything like that. I feel like from this episode on its own, is actually quite good, and it presents a good opportunity to develop a very good Series 11 and era going forward. Ultimately, Series 11 didn't do it, and I will agree to the most part, based on my opinion from last year really, that Series 11 wasn't great. But on this story alone, watching it again, I think actually it's a really, really strong start and shows that Chris Chibnall can write decent stories. There are obviously not so great things, I think, in Chris's dialogue. It's not always brilliant stuff with he seems to have a little bit of a problem. I sort of remembered that I had this criticism last year, and I noticed it again watching this story, is he seems to have he doesn't seem to be very good at writing exposition and expository dialogue. It seems to be very sort of on the nose, explain something, like Ryan's got dyspraxia, here's what dyspraxia is. It's like he didn't seem to be very, very good at interweaving things like that, facts about characters, into the dialogue in a nice, sort of smooth way. It seems sort of very on the nose, I found. So it's not a major thing, but it is just a kind of a sign, I guess, that Chris isn't brilliant in certain aspects of writing. I know it's not saying it's an easy thing to do, but it felt a little bit out of place and quite noticeable at points in this story, I thought. So yes, overall, The Woman Who Fell to Earth was a pretty damn good start to the series, I thought. Although it had a few little issues to it, as an overall episode and story, I thought it did a really, really good job of establishing this new era, this new set of characters, and a new sort of vibe and atmosphere for the show. So I thought that did it really, really effectively. Maybe not as brilliant an episode as, say, The 11th Hour, or even Deep Breath, in terms of starting off a new era, but I still thought that it was a really, really solid start, and there really was a lot of course optimism rather than negativity, at least at that very early stage. So following on from that, we have the great cliffhanger ending where we see the Doctor and her three companions all stuck out in space, in the middle of space, leaving you on a complete edge of how on earth do they get out of this, resolve this, which of course is fairly easily resolved at the beginning of the second episode, The Ghost Monument, which is an episode that it's always a challenge, I think, to sort of write that second episode, that first adventure with the Doctor and companions away from Earth, going out into space on this occasion to sort of have a proper alien type story on a brilliant alien planet. Again, as I spoke about in the first episode, the visuals are amazing. It looks absolutely stunning and fantastic throughout. The way they've realised that alien planet is just phenomenal. Like the cinematography, it's just all so effective. The CGI looks fantastic. It really just has such a cinematic feel. It almost feels like you'd be watching Star Wars. It felt so good, I thought, at times, which again, as I said before, is something that continues throughout this series from what I remember at least, and it's just one of the real highlights, especially when sort of watching, say, even just something like Series 5 at the moment, how different it looks in terms of the visuals are just so much better. It's fantastic. Now, I remember one of my main criticisms of this story at the time was the kind of lack of actually a real plot to this story. It's basically just a sort of a challenge to get across a planet to eventually find the TARDIS, and that is basically all there is to it. So there still isn't very much plot to it, but I didn't feel that massively sort of took away from the story. It's very much sort of more character focused in a way, sort of helping to start to initially build and develop the relationships between all the main characters, and also giving us a little insight into these two characters from these alien worlds that we see as well in this story, and the effect of the Stenza that have had, having had a sort of impact in episode 1, and finding out this has had an impact to another character in this second episode as well, which just, at least early on as we thought it might do, gave us a bit of an arc, supposedly, which never actually happened, but that's sort of what it was kind of giving off as an idea, I think. So I thought that worked quite effectively throughout this story, and also obviously the whole ultimate goal of finding the TARDIS again I thought it was a really good way to be able to kind of bring in the new TARDIS and really build it up, rather than just throwing everything into episode 1. It gave the opportunity to really build it up and have more focus on these different aspects of the show and the things that are involved when they wanted to kind of reinvent it in that sense. And so having the new TARDIS as the prize at the end of the second episode I thought was a really good way of doing it, and sort of makes a really good build up throughout it. Even if the Doctor has a rather funny sort of doubting moment where she thinks that it's all been for nothing, she's going to die, they're all going to die, it's all a failure. It seemed a little bit too sort of self-doubting of a moment from the Doctor, maybe, I thought, but then it was obviously resolved fairly quickly, and it was brilliant to see the new TARDIS in there, even if it's not probably one of my favourites. I still don't think it's one of my favourites, really. Just in the wide shot, it looks awful in the wide shot. The close-ups are good, there's lots of good sort of patterns and everything on the walls and whatever, and it's not bad, but it just doesn't work for me fully, I think. So that's a little bit of a shame, but certainly not a massive detractor from this episode. I feel like straight away from this episode we're already starting to see the more of a focus on the Ryan and Graham relationship rather than any focus on Yaz as a character. Again, she, as we saw in a lot of episodes of Series 11, she doesn't have very much to do in this story, which is a shame. and unfortunately was just a sign of what was to come in terms of getting even worse. But it was also good to see the initial sort of beginnings of the Graham and Ryan relationship building up, the initial "I won't call you grandpa" type line, or granddad, and then, as we know, that sort of resolved by the end of the series, which is great to see. So it's good in that aspect to sort of see the seeds being sown initially for that sort of relationship to develop through the series. I thought that's quite good, and also seeing the Doctor establish a character more, which I think is done really, really effectively in this story. It sort of feels like one of those fairly inconsequential episodes, maybe, without putting it in a negative way. Like, it's a thoroughly solid and enjoyable story. It's just not really memorable in any way. There's nothing particularly special about it, apart from introducing the new TARDIS. It looks, in terms of the visuals, stunning, as I say, but in terms of plot, there's not really anything there that's really very meaty or interesting as an idea. It is just a race across a planet, basically. That's all really it is, and that's fine. I think it works. I think it does a good job of it. But there's just nothing more to it. So it's quite a simplistic episode in that way, with a few interesting ideas about the whole "the water's deadly" and the sniper bot things as well in the middle of the episode as well, which is a bit random, but I guess it's a sort of a threat to overcome to get to your goal or something along those lines of the idea behind it. So yeah, it works well enough, even if it's nothing massively special. So overall, looking at these first couple of episodes, I kind of have a pretty positive outlook on Series 11, sort of at least based on these two episodes. It very much felt, by this point, like a series with a lot of potential, where it had a really good first episode, a solid second episode to kind of establish all the characters, and then the opportunity, hopefully going forward, for it to really flourish as a series and keep on improving, which didn't really happen so much, and I'll tackle in future videos in the coming weeks as I watch these various episodes. But it's, yeah, I sort of look at least these two episodes in isolation and say, it's not bad. I don't mind this Doctor Who. This is quite fun. This is quite enjoyable. It's quite well made. I sort of, based on just these two episodes, I don't see all the problems, but as we know, there's a lot more to come where maybe more problems will arise. So guys, I'd love to hear your comments down below of what you think about these first two episodes a year or so on. Have you reevaluated it at all? Are your opinions still the same the day the episodes aired? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. But other than that, remember to hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll be back again for another one of these in the next week or two, and lots of other videos, of course. So see you again soon. Bye!